Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name is Lesroy Williams. Today we are here to talk about World Read Aloud Day, which is observed this year on the 5th of February. This is the third year that the Clarence Fitzroy Bryant College is hosting World Read Aloud Day. Today we are having a panel interview where we have come together to celebrate the joy and power of reading aloud. And today we will engage in a discussion about the power of reading. Observed globally, World Reading Aloud Day highlights the importance of sharing stories and the profound impact it has on literacy, imagination, and community building. Reading aloud not only enhances our listening and comprehension skills, but also fosters a love for reading that can last a lifetime. Whether you're a parent, a teacher, a librarian, or simply a book lover, your voice can bring stories to life and inspire others. I have a very well-equipped panel with me, and we would have this discussion on the power of reading. I would ask them to introduce themselves and to say who they are, starting at my immediate right.
Good day. My name is Wycliffe Morton. I'm a Christian. I'm an architect and a landscape architect. I'm also a lecturer here at CFBC. I also have an architectural practice. And for me, in terms of who I am an avid reader, and I would encourage anyone to become proficient, because reading leads to writing and so much more.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeanne Williams Knight. I am an alumna of the Clarence Fitzroy Bryant College, graduated in 2000 as the state scholar. I later went on to be a Chevening Scholar in 2013 to do my master's in intellectual property law. And now I am the registrar of the Intellectual Property Office. Outside of all of that, I am an author, I am a poet, I'm a spoken word performer, and generally just love reading, although I don't get the opportunity to read as much for pleasure as I would like. But I definitely endorse the topic today, and I hope we get to explore how we could encourage more reading.
Good afternoon. I am Miss Millicent Palmer Dawson. I am a senior lecturer here. I facilitate literacy and language courses rather, in early childhood. I'm also a trained teacher librarian, an applied linguist, and an avid reader. I think I know the power of reading and the power of reading aloud to young children. So I'm looking forward to an August discussion.
Good afternoon to everyone. I am Sonita Daniel. I'm from Nevis, and I'm the Director of Library Services here at the Clarence Fitzroy Bryant College. I am a reading advocate. I always try to encourage reading because I know the power of reading, how transformative it can be. And I've seen it in the lives of persons I've tutored. And so I want to encourage reading in our society at all levels.
Good afternoon. I am Leroy Pemberton Jr., Senior Lecturer in Literatures in English and Communication Studies.
Good afternoon. I'm Cameron Gill, Senior Lecturer in History and Caribbean Studies. I'm a historian and archaeologist by training. One of my colleagues said earlier that reading leads to writing and more, and I can personally attest to that because I've been a bookworm from the time I've known myself, and it's that love for reading that led me into a love for history, and that's gotten me to where I am today. So with postgraduate degrees in history and archaeology, I'm a published author as well, published my first book 2 years ago, and I'm actually working on 2 other books right now. I also do private consultancy in the area of heritage management, particularly built heritage, etc. And I'm happy to be here.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Tony Allen. I'm a student of the Clarence Fitzroy Bryant College, pursuing an associate degree in mathematics. I am an avid reader as well. I've always been a voracious reader from the time I was in primary school, and I'm looking forward to the discussion that we will have today.
Yes, so we've started off on a very, very good note, and I am going to start with our CFBC student, Miss Tony Allen. And Tony, how does reading benefit you in your studies? And what role do you think reading plays in helping to shape a well-balanced student?
Okay, thank you for that question. Firstly, reading helps to shape a well-balanced student by increasing your knowledge. That is the main reason why students need to read, to increase the knowledge that they have in order to perform well in their studies, whether it's history, communication studies, mathematics, which I am pursuing. No matter what course you're pursuing, you need to read in order to gain knowledge. But also, aside from reading, for the obvious coursework, reading also helps to make you well-balanced as it gives you knowledge outside of the classroom. There's a misconception that reading only takes place in classrooms, and that's simply not the case. Reading exposes you to information from the outside world, information that you can apply in your studies as well. So that's how reading creates a well-balanced student, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Now, Mr. Gill, you said that you are architecture and history.
Archaeology, sorry.
Archaeology and history, and that you've been a bookworm since you've known yourself. How can reading contribute to a person's knowledge of history and archaeology?
Thank you for that. And in my answer, I will also use a reverse logic as well in terms of how history can develop somebody's reading skill. Okay. First of all, history is a reading subject. Some subjects like history, sociology, economics, etc., are by nature reading subjects. So once somebody has a love for reading, then it makes their approach to the subject easier. Okay. The main issue that many history teachers face with the subject itself is not difficult, but if students have a block or an aversion towards reading, or if they subscribe to some, how should I put it, mistaken stereotypes about reading, that is only for nerds, etc., is going to create a challenge for them in terms of their approach to what is really not a difficult subject, at least not at the level at which they engage in with it. At my level, the professional level, it gets more challenging, but it's still enjoyable. But at their level, it's a very easy subject. So once you have appreciation for reading, then you can get through the material. Okay? Now I'm going to reverse the logic in answering to also show how history can assist somebody's reading. There's a reason why some professions and some academic institutions for some programs give preference to history graduates. For example, my colleague, Ms. Williams, could attest that practically all reputable law schools have history as one of the main prerequisites to get into their law degree programs. Many of them give emphasis to subjects like history. When they see that on a student's transcript, they give preference to that. Okay? There's a reason for that. History not only reading, but analysis. Okay? So for example, in History Unit 2, one of the areas we look at is the Second World War. So students Now, contrary to a stereotype, history is not just about being a scribe and you're chronicling events. You need to analyze what caused this event to happen, okay? And then what are the consequences of this event? And some of the consequences of the Second World War are still with us today. The current war in Ukraine is a legacy of that. The war in the Middle East between Israel and Gaza is a legacy of that as well. So students get to understand and they're able to analyze past events and realize these are not separate events from us. They are not non-relevant to us. They're actually still impacting us, and they will continue to impact future generations. So subject like history helps you to analyze what you read in other fields. So that is why law, journalism, many professions give preference to history graduates, even many business schools. Some years ago when I was an undergrad at UWI, we had a guest lecturer, can't remember her name, but she was a professor at the John F. Kennedy School of Management at Harvard University. And she shocked many of those of us attending, even the history majors like myself, when she said that the John F. Kennedy School, they give preference to history majors because of the research skills that they would have acquired. So history can help your reading skills in other subject areas as well. But again, to approach the subject of history, you have to have an appreciation for reading. It was my love for reading that got me fascinated with history.
Right. Now, what can possibly happen to people in a society who do not read, especially read about the past events, history? What danger, what risk is there if they do not read?
Mr. Williams, as I'm sure you suspect, your question is a timely one. If you look at events around the world, for example, we live in a world where students today have much greater access to information than even just a few years ago. You're bombarded by information from social media, and it's a positive thing. For example, in preparing lessons, we have access to online databases, etc. Once upon a time, as a lecturer preparing lessons, you had to depend on physical resources, physical libraries, etc. So it was even more time-consuming than it is now. Now the information is there at your fingertips. The trouble is, if people, you need to still read, because then you have a background from which you can analyze what. So people are now bombarded with information, but because they don't develop the analytical skill, they are easily misled. So you see, for example, the rise of populism in the United States, mainland Europe, other parts of the world now. So you have populist demagogues who are telling people that, well, basically, there's nothing new under the sun. So what was happening 70 years ago in the 1930s in Europe, you've seen that pattern being repeated again. And there are dangerous consequences. So people taking what they see on social media, and I'm not blasting social media, it is a great thing. But if people cannot analyze what they ingest, it creates a problem. To develop that foundation where you can analyze the information you absorb, you need to read. You need to read. Right now we are seeing dangers, we're seeing a rise of xenophobia, etc. And this comes from people not reading and not being able to analyze what is being fed to them. A few years ago during the COVID-19 pandemic, even among educated people, you had a lot of conspiracy theories and misinformation spreading. And again, this comes from people not reading and not analyzing information.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Gill. Mr. Pemberton, you are the literature man, communication studies, and so on. And he spoke about reading, but my question to you is, how can reading support comprehension strategies? How can reading, what role it plays in developing fluency? How can it help reading with spelling and grammar?
So that's three facets of the benefits of reading that we're looking at. Well, reading generally encourages or inspires those who do it to consider the theme, the main ideas, and they also have to examine language and its structure. So what reading does, therefore, it activates your thinking, it forces you to analyze, take it apart. It not only helps you analyze, it also helps you to evaluate what you have been looking at, judging its value, also judging the impact of it, and it also helps you to think critically, where your conclusions are not based on mere feelings, but on evidence and on sound reasoning. And if those skill sets are honed through the practice of reading, certainly it would boost your comprehension. Then what were the other two facets you asked about?
They help with spelling and grammar.
Oh, yeah. If you read the best material, then certainly you will learn from the good models. As Mark Twain once says in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, the man who does not read, the man who can read and does not read good books is no better than the man who can't read and doesn't. What's good books? It is entirely subjective. Good books could be a function of your taste. But certainly, it must address matters of making you aware, developing a better understanding of society, of the world around you and of yourself. It also includes well-crafted literature, and by reading the best writers, you will certainly pay attention to their language. You will understand the use of grammar, vocabulary, and structure. And I think that's the best way of learning it. When it is caught and not just taught, I think it's more natural and it even stays longer with you. And then there's a third.
The fluency.
Fluency. Well,
developing fluency.
Yeah. Well, certainly reading promotes that. Because one of the things that you get from reading is that it fills your head with ideas, with knowledge, with information. And that is fundamental to fluency. If you don't have anything to say, you won't be confident in saying it at all. As I enjoy telling my students in communication studies, there are two kinds of speakers. The speaker who has to say something and the speaker who has something to say. So with that information, with that body of information, getting perspectives and new ideas, it boosts your confidence. The other thing too is that sometimes the speaker may have ideas, but doesn't have the means to express it. Reading gives you the vocabulary, teaches you how to string phrases together. You understand the magic of the language. And so with content, you could also use the appropriate vocabulary to express your concerns with ease and with fluency.
Thank you. Mrs. Daniel, you're the college's librarian, and the library is a place where you have books. You have all kinds of books. And it's a place where people go to look for books, to borrow books, to read books. If we look at our libraries and the scarcity of people in them, it must send a message. How can libraries promote reading in the society? How can libraries promote reading to their patrons?
Well, libraries curate collections, and so libraries should offer a wide range of materials, including books, e-books, multimedia materials, newspapers, magazines. So not just having them, but also those in diverse subject areas, diverse topics, and also at different reading levels, because we want to be able to reach all levels of the society. In addition, the collection should be up to date, because we want to be able to present our users with up-to-date materials, which include new releases and relevant materials, so that we can keep them engaged. Because we want them to come, it's like a business. We must have books which are, to me, which are interesting, and books which would meet the needs of the reader and the taste of the reader. Additionally, the books must also be accessible, because we should be able to have books which in different formats, whether in large print books, we should have books in Braille, and we should be able to have audio books so that we can include, where the collection is inclusive. We can reach to the persons who have disabilities. And so if we want to encourage reading, it is important that we have an up-to-date collection, a very diverse collection, and also have a collection which is accessible. In addition, libraries are no longer just a place for books. Libraries are also spaces, are considered spaces. And so the space must be inviting and comfortable, and so that we are able to provide the kind of atmosphere that will attract, persons from the community. In addition to the welcoming space, the libraries must also must be like a community hub, where you'll have book clubs, hosting events, book clubs, discussions. We should have engaging programs for babies, preschoolers, toddlers, adults, teenagers. We have to have those, because that today that the social media and the electronic media, and social media platform, they are competing for the attention of persons who could become readers. And so we have to have engaging, programs so that we can reach all levels of the society. In addition, we need to be able to have special, different types of spaces. There must be space for reading, space for studying, space for computer space. We should be able to offer, internet, so we can bridge the digital divide. And because some resources are in e-format, and so should be able to read, those digital resources. You should be able to come to the library and read the digital resources, to do research, to do homework, and so forth. So we need to have all those. And the library also has to be one which, is advocate for literacy, and to get the funding so that these programs, we can support these programs. Reading is seen today as a right. And so therefore, we must be able to provide, we must be able to satisfy that need, that right, so that everyone will have access to reading and no one will be left behind. And the library must also be not just in the capital, but also in the rural areas, so that you can extend its reach, to the rural areas, so we can, we'll be able to reach people wherever they are. And so it is important that the library gets engaged in all of these, so that we can really encourage reading at all levels of the society. I think that we can see, that if you look at the reading landscape in St. Kitts and Nevis, we see there's a decline in reading in children, teenagers, adults. We also see that we have anecdotal evidence that many children are reading below the grade levels. And so we should have libraries to promote reading activities, book talks, authors' visits, and so forth, so that we could encourage reading We also see within the landscape in St. Kitts and Nevis, we also see that we see the competition between the electronic media and the social media platforms. And so we have to try to encourage, do a lot to encourage reading. We know that books no longer come in just print formats. They're in e-formats and audio, so they are books to meet all tastes, all desires. And so we have to, as libraries, be able to provide for those. We also see within our reading landscape that we, in our reading landscape, we also see that we do not have, we don't have, the book clubs are non-existent. Reading, and also they are not there's no national passion for reading. And so we need to be able to promote a national passion for reading. We also need to be, and that could be done by libraries. We can have a St. Kitts Reads 1 month when we celebrate reading, or even a year to celebrate reading and put it on the national agenda. These are some of the things that we can do. When we look at, we know that if we are reading less, it means that if we are reading less, we are also reading less well. Because as Mr. Pemberton said about Mark Twain, and also Jim Rohn, he said that those who can read, there's no difference. Jim Rohn said there's no difference between those who can read and those who cannot read, because none is reading. And so we have to put reading on the national agenda. And the decline in reading is not just a literary issue. I think it is more than that, because it has social, economic, and other implications which need to be addressed, not later, but now.
One of the things when I visit a home, sometimes I see no books. There are some homes, when you visit them, you see a bookshelf, and the bookshelf is filled with books. They have a library, and that creates an impression. It tells you what type of home that it actually is. So thank you very much for your presentation, Mrs. Daniel. We can have our libraries at home as well. And it says something about the value that the home places on reading.
Yes, and if I may interject, children who read, they tend to come from homes where they see their parents reading. Yes. So parents, we have to be a model reader to our children. So we have to try to do that and encourage reading at the family level.
Mm-hmm. Mrs. Dawson, it is said that St. Kitts has a very high literacy rate. I am not going to dispute that. 90-something%, I am told, about 98%. Somebody recently told me that the definition of a literate person is somebody who can spell their name and write their name, basically. But I'm sure that it is much more than that. So how does reading, because it has to start at an early age, how does reading benefit children's literacy development? These questions are related. How does reading contribute to early literacy skills? And how does reading support lifelong learning?
3 very good questions, Mr. Williams. And to begin, I like to begin at the beginning by using a definition. I need to put forth a definition for reading. What is reading? Reading is decoding, knowing, and interpreting symbols. That is one of the many definitions put forward by theorists for the skill or the art or craft of reading. But what does it entail? What does reading really entail? We have to answer this question before I go into emergent literacy, which is what you're really asking me about. Reading is one of 4 main skills or modes. The first, they say, is listening, then speaking. Reading is the third, and writing is the fourth, but there are 2 others. One is visually representing and viewing. All of these components work together in language development, literacy, and language learning and language acquisition. Now, for little ones, what is it that they do? What is it that they do in the act of acquiring knowledge or literacy or reading development? What children actually do is to interpret symbols. What are the symbols? Alphabetic. They need to be equipped with alphabetic knowledge. There's the alphabetic principle where they learn to pronounce, to call words, call letters. And then from there, we move on to phonemic development, phonemic awareness, phonemic development. There are tiers on that triangle. And at the end is fluency. You mentioned it earlier. Our aim is to develop fluency at whatever age and stage students are at. There are milestones. There are literacy milestones, reading milestones. And as such, we have to teach them all these tiers. They're on their way to reading. After phonemic and phonics knowledge, we have vocabulary, we have grammar, we have reading comprehension, which is different from reading. I think reading comes first, then reading comprehension, finally fluency. So we have to get children on that pyramid. Where are they? In K, they are on their way learning about letters. That's it. How letters are, or you sound them, or they should sound. And the thing is, they are studying the English code. So they have to learn how to pronounce words, how to call the letters. All of these intricate underpinnings are a part of literacy and emergent development. I don't want to use the other phrase, emergent development for early learners. And as such, our little ones have to master all those components of the reading process before we can say they have reached a milestone. Could you remind me of the second question?
The second question had to do with the supporting lifelong learning.
No, the second.
There was another one.
Yes.
The second one had to do with how does reading contribute to early literacy skills?
And with what I've said, with students going through the process of learning to read, they are open to. You have to give them, someone said it before, you have to present students with authentic literature, good quality books, good quality text, poems, all of these, rhymes. You have to submerge. They have to be immersed or submerged in all these different literary texts for them to acquire language, literacy, and ultimately be able to manipulate texts. Now, what do they use? What are the values of reading? It opens children's imagination. It transports them to worlds unknown, places they wouldn't have gone, places they can't go. You can give a child a book or read it to the child. That's why read aloud is very important. Present young children with quality literature so they can expand their horizon, they can expand their vocabulary, they can notice print. That print on a page has meaning. It gives them the ability to read from left to right, because that's how reading goes. You read, you call it directionality. It hones their ability to read print on a page. And someone said earlier that the more we read, the more knowledgeable we are. The more, and this informs your third question, what reading does to us on a whole. What it does, it encourages lifelong learning. It is at the heart of self-learning and lifelong learning. You might not go to school, but you can take up a book and inform yourself. It opens you up to more perspectives. You are introduced to more voices. Without reading, we are like lopsided, one-sided. Some of us can't think. And we can't think because we don't read much, and we don't read quality literature. We read anything that is given to us. Ms. Daniel talked about the impact of technology on our children on reading. And it is true. We find students they're not writing as well as we want them to, and we ask ourselves the question, why is it that they're not producing the kind of writing? I'm going to say, remember those 4 skills I started with? Speaking, listening, reading, and writing. 2 are expressive skills. 2 are receptive skills. Reading happens to be a receptive skill, because things go in receptive skills. Information is inputted in the mind. We take in information through reading and listening. We hear words through the ears, and when we read, punctuation, grammar, words, all of these enter the mind. And Chomsky pointed out that we have a language acquisition device. It's not actually a device. It's the ability to harvest, to take in words, knowledge, and to produce it. So the more you read with this device, so-called device in the mind, the more we feed into our mind, the better we operate, we can write. So you read quality literature, you can write. You should be able, let me change what I'm saying. We should be able to write well. Back to Ms. Daniel, she said that technology is impacting reading and children, etc. And it is true, because what is it that our children are reading? Text, language, shorthand. When you mark CXC and K papers, you see text language there. What is it? You ask yourself, what is it that they are reading? What is being inputted in the mind? Text, language, slangs, expletives. Quality literature is thrown out the window. And as such, we find students are not really writing better with technology because they're using it wrongly. They're not, even though we have ebooks, they're not reading ebooks, they're not interested in it. They go online, a naked lady pops up, they follow the trail to wherever it leads. And so, back to your introductory statement, the percentage of literate persons, it's questionable, but it is what it is. We need to dig, we need to ask ourselves, what are the instruments that were used to gather such data? What informed that? But I am not going to question it. But for little children, in closing, little children, it's easy from my perspective. Just read aloud to them so they can hear your pronunciation, or you enunciate words. Give them quality literature, pour it in, so that they can let it out. right? Parents can do it at home. We find parents. If I should ask many persons listening, how many of you have been read to as a child before you go to bed? How many of us? I asked my class that once, and I won't tell you the response because I can't remember a hand going up, maybe one or two. But we find children who are read to, they are more receptive to language, they are more receptive to print, and their cognition. Because one thing I am going to mention before I close is that reading helps. Reading engenders, it really impacts positively your cognitive development. Because you question things, you question the text, the author is talking to you, and you alone, and you are responding in your mind, and you're looking at different viewpoints, and a lot goes on when you're reading. So reading can only be a powerful tool.
So reading is basically more than reading. Reading has to do with critical reading. So you're engaged with the material that you are reading. So literacy is more than being able to spell your name and to write your name and to read, but to understand what it is that you're reading and to make the necessary changes that are important based on what you read. Now, Jihan, you are responsible for the Intellectual Property Office. And a lot of what is being said in terms of books and whatever kind of books, textbooks or fiction, literature, poetry books, and I know that you do poetry and so on, that is all a part of culture, and that has to be protected. That has to be protected. So my question to you is, how can reading promote cultural awareness and diversity? That's one. And how can reading be used to celebrate cultural heritage? I know we look at intangible cultural heritage and all of that, and the preservation of that. How can people's reading help to develop an awareness of how we can protect these treasures that we have?
Thank you for that question. I just want to say quickly, as we were talking about the literacy rate, just to point out, I've been hearing that number for at least 20 years. So are we using an old test and we've never tested again, or has it remained consistent? And I think perhaps if we really assess, those who can assess reading and writing 20 years ago to know the number is not the same. So perhaps we are using the results of a very old test and still trying to apply it to current day. Well, in terms of cultural heritage, there is a saying, a proverb that I like, which says, until the lion learns to write, history will always honor the hunter. Because the stories that we have records of, they come from the perspective of whoever wrote them. A lot of our textbooks, especially from history, they record perspectives that were not necessarily reflective of Black people, women, young people. So we have accepted the records that exist as our history, or the majority of them that exist as our history. But it only really shares the perspective of whoever had the courage and ability and the opportunity to write. And I think it's important for us to recognize that perhaps we have lost so much information simply because people did not write, simply because people did not record their stories. Perhaps historians like Cameron have such a difficult job because the information is so sparse that we kind of have to piece things together to make a complete story. And we will never know if we have the complete story, because the people who existed 70, 80, 100 plus years ago, they may no longer be with us. So it's important that we acknowledge that our sense of cultural awareness is informed simply by what is recorded in writing. And what is recorded in writing is from persons who may not have given accurate reflections of what happened in the day. So I think what that challenges our office to do, and me personally, it's a personal passion of mine, I think it's important that we understand that we write history every day. So 40 years from now, when this panel discussion airs somewhere, it will become part of history. So we have to make a concerted effort to ensure that the stories that we record and we write now reflect the different perspectives. This means if every single person on this panel wrote a book, we would have so many different stories. Tony's story might not be my story of if I recollect my time at CFBC. Her experiences may differ very differently from, somebody else's experience. And I think it's important that we start recognizing that we have a responsibility to ourselves now and to future generations for cultural preservation purposes to start writing more and reading more. It is through reading that we become more aware of other perspectives, particularly perspectives of those who are so far away in the world. Reading is the cheapest way to travel. You just pick up a book. Once the writer is good, you can get an appreciation of what the setting feels like, what it sounds like, what it smells like, and you could almost imagine yourself being there. That sort of transportation, that sort of imagination that it encourages, these are the kind of attributes that we need to encourage in young people, because that same imagination is what's going to create inventions. It's what's going to push innovation. Reading about something that happened in Seychelles or Malaysia or somewhere else, you might say, hey, these people live circumstances that are similar to our own in some form or fashion. It worked over there. Can we try it over here? And that sharing of perspective and information is how we build our own knowledge base and how we support our own growth and development here as well. I also wanted to say, in terms of cultural heritage, reading is important. Well, not only is it the cheapest way to travel, it's the only way to travel to the past, particularly due to the lack of technology. So this generation will have many videos and many blogs and many different, and vlogs and different tools that they could share their perspectives. But when it comes to the past, what we really have is art. What we really have is writing. So it's the only way we could travel back to the past. And I think it's important that we start documenting and preserving the skills, the tools, the methods, how people really used to cook goat water, how people really used to cook up, how you really used to wash and cook on stones and things like that, because we have to record this for our own cultural preservation, because there are what we call culture vultures, and people who will come and say that, oh, this is not from St. Kitts and Nevis because we do it over here. I was hearing a story even recently about the Antiguan black pineapple really originating in St. Kitts, and there was this war between who the pineapple really belongs to. But what proof, what evidence do we have? it will all come down to what is written and what is read. And we need to read widely to ensure that the policies we write, that the efforts we endorse are truly reflective of the society that we want to engender. So even to Mrs. Daniels' point about libraries creating an environment that encourage reading, I really endorse that, because it's important that we realize that we have to consciously create the society that we want. It is not going to happen by simply saying, oh, we need people to read more. We have to sit down and strategize on what strategies can we create and execute to ensure that there are 40 more students coming to this library every day. And it's exciting, and it's fun, and they want to come back, and they want to invite people. We have to consciously do these things. It will not happen on its own.
Thank you so much, Jihan. I liked when you said that reading is basically traveling, because reading, I think, is an antidote to insularity. And so therefore, we learn about other cultures, we learn to appreciate diversity, and those things are extremely important. Our knowledge is, we expand our knowledge that, look, there are others out there. There are people like us as well, that there are similarities and that there are differences and so on. So I think that is an extremely important point. I never looked at it that way, but when you said that reading is traveling, reading is traveling. You don't have to jump on a plane and go to New York to learn what is the culture there. You can read about it. And when you get there, you'd basically know what to expect and how to maneuver yourself in such a culture.
And just to say quickly, I wasn't born when the MV Christina sank, but it is through what persons have written. I did not meet a Christina survivor maybe until about 5 years ago, to actually hear somebody say what the experience was like. But because of what was written, able to engage and connect with what happened on that fateful day. So I think it's important, again, for cultural preservation. It's Black History Month in the US right now, but the thing is, we need to celebrate and be aware of what happened in our own country. And it's through reading and through writing that we're going to become more cognizant of these things and the impact. When we think about how many farmers you lost in the MV Christina, what was the impact for agriculture in terms of the know-how, in terms of the knowledge in farming? Have we ever really considered that? So it's important for us to really assess and analyze what has been written and what has been recorded, to preserve our culture, but also to ensure that the mishaps of the past don't happen again.
And that is important, the reading ourselves, but we need to read these stories to our children. Reading aloud, storytelling. You know, once ago, people sat around the family table and they had discussions. Nowadays, that does not happen. The technology is good, but now everybody has their cell phone and they're into their cell phone. So storytelling in our communities is important. Very, very important to preserving our culture. Cultural preservation happens through storytelling. We have to keep telling the stories, and that is how it is preserved. Thank you, Gian. Mr. Morton, now you teach in a technical area. And one of the things that I found when I taught down at TechVoc and I taught English to the students who were doing auto mechanic or air conditioning and refrigeration, they used to say to me, I don't see the importance of doing this English class. Why am I doing English class? I am going to be out there and I am going to be hands-on. I'm going to be working on cars. I'm going to do air conditioning and refrigeration. Why do I want English? Why? And so my question to you is, why read? Why people in the technical field should be encouraged to read? And what are the challenges and opportunities of using technology for reading? And what are some ways to incorporate multimedia elements in reading? Some people have difficulty in probably just taking up a book. As I said, these people are more hands-on. How can you get them to be more interested in reading? How can you use the technology?
If I may, I do believe that because of my training, the way I perceive reading is different. We talk about reading plans, for example, or reading drawings. So for us, the graphics go beyond the letters of the alphabet. And very often, sadly, what we find in the technical area are people who may not have developed in a typical or expected way academically, because as human beings, we develop different areas at different times based on different interests as well. And so if we do not fall into the expected, A stream or B stream, you get shunted off to the technical areas. And so that already creates a bias. The students and the persons who get, or a good number of them that get shunted into the technical field, have been told, well, you can't read well, so go and do this. You're not too firm with the maths, so go and do this with your hands. And so it creates the impression on an impressionable child that you really don't need the reading and the writing skills to be able to do that, because the adults that you look up to, the education system says, well, because you can't do this well, go and do that. And it devalues the idea of reading. Reading is critically important in the technical fields. There are so many manuals, and there's so many models of anything. Every year, they put out 20, 30 new versions of vehicles, just from in the United States alone. How do we, in the Caribbean especially, deal with those issues of knowing how to repair a car? You have to have the manual. You have to read the manual, so that what used to happen, I'm going to, a nod and a wink, doesn't happen anymore, where the auto mechanic takes down your car and he puts it back up and he tells you, oh, you're good. And you say, but what are those 20 bolts that you took out? He's not familiar with the manual. I find a challenge. I teach architecture here at the college. And the descriptive language which we use typically in architecture, the students, well, I hate to use the term struggling, because the majority of them, we find them to be lost. And these are not necessarily technical terms. If we say a cube, take a cube and put it on one point and rotate it in a clockwise direction, a lot of them and that's just a cube. If you say deconstruct a cube, well, a lot of them don't even understand that it comes out to look like a cross. How do you expose people to this and to the technical field when the symbology of the English language is not fully understood? Well, I am not afraid to say that I am a nerd. And so I spent many hours, and it started with National Geographic back in the day, down in the old library. And Miss Lands, who was the librarian at the time, used to allow us to sit in the stacks and read until the library closes down. And it went from National Geographics to Hardy Boys to Biggles, which was about World War I fighters. Because of that, I wanted to become an aeronautical engineer in primary school. Then when I found out, 78, 79, the shuttle went up, that was done by CAD. I said, well, there goes that. And I switched to architecture by the time I was 11. Had I not read of these things, I would have no idea about what was possible. And so, being able to read opens up our imagination, which is needed in the technical areas because we need to be able to comprehend things three-dimensionally and sometimes four-dimensionally, where we introduce time. Being able to read fosters that sense of imagination, helps you to be able to hold on to an idea and to process it. And that ultimately translates into the technical areas. So while the students may not perceive it, we're here to lecture to them, to teach them, to instruct them what they really need to know. And it is important to tell them, well, you know, in order to learn, sometimes you have to forget some of the things that you think you know.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Morton. I've heard so many things today, and so much we have learned from just what you have said in terms of the benefits and the importance of reading. Enhancing comprehension skills, it supports language development and literacy development, cultural awareness and diversity, developing fluency, supporting lifelong learning, preventing insularity. Reading is traveling and developing cognitive skills, and so many things that we can benefit from reading, whether reading aloud or just privately reading, our own reading. And I want to give you a minute, just 1 minute, for your closing statement. Starting with Alan. It could be less than a minute.
Well, from my this. Hello? Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, from my closing statement, I'd like to say that reading can educate, inspire, and transform your future. And reading is just more than looking at words on a page. Reading helps you to shape the person that you'll eventually become. So I encourage the listening audience to take up a book. Even if you haven't read in a while, You can start off with something simple. Just read a poem, a short story, anything, because starting now is better than never starting ever. So pick up a book, turn the page, and unlock the possibilities that await you. Thank you.
Reading opens your mind. And once you open your mind, then you open doors. You open doors to understanding other cultures and realizing that as human beings, yes, while we're proud of your nationality, etc., we have more in common than what differentiates us. So you open your mind to understanding your fellow human beings. You open your mind to opportunities because you learn more, and then you get ideas, as one of my colleagues spoke about. Then from your formative years, you get ideas about what do I want to do the rest of my life? What careers do I want to pursue? So it opens doors to understanding others and to understanding yourself as well. And that is my less than a minute.
I'd want to close with a famous quote from my dad, who himself was a very avid reader, my mother too, but Daddy often quoted Francis Bacon, who said, "Reading maketh a full man." Rounded education, what reading does is that it helps you to appreciate life fully and to take full advantage of the opportunities that life offers.
Thank you. As I close, I want to say that a literate population is important for a progressive society. And so we, on this, the 50th anniversary of World Read Aloud Day, we want to encourage that we put reading on the national agenda in St. Kitts and Nevis, because, as we've heard, reading inspires innovation, lifelong learning, and it also helps us to be more informed citizens, informed decision, and it helps to maintain the democratic process and for good governance. And so I want to encourage us to commit ourselves to reading and see what we can do, that we can help to build that reading culture in our society. We are aware that despite our high literacy rate, which is commendable, but it is a paradox. And I think because we are struggling and we have a decline in the ability to read and the habit of reading, and so we have a lot to do. But I think together we can.
I think the Shylights or the Temptations sang a song that I like. It says, "There's no me without you. There's no reading without writing." And that is coming to me forcefully through this rich discourse we have had. And as such, in order for Kittitians and Nevisians to have to read and to have something they want to read, we must write more. There's a love relationship between reading and writing. They're interconnected. And as such, I'm encouraging more persons to write so we have something to read. And in writing, you capture the rich tapestry of the islands. We see our language being brought into the whole situation. We learn more about each other. We can share our perspective. So write more so we can have something more to read.
She stole my closing statement. I believe that there is no one in this world who does not like to read. I think we all like to read. The question is, are we finding material that we like? So it really, me, that is the definition. We have to focus our energies on making sure that young people especially have material that they're interested in. I think that's where a lot of progress is going to come from.
There is a reason why the enslaved Africans were not allowed to read. We ought not be perpetuating that. I do not believe that we have a literacy rate of 98. If you listen to a young boy read now, the average young man is reading well below their grade level. It is a sad situation, and we need to change it, because reading makes us a world citizen. We might be able to read only English and wind up in France, but because we know how to read and understand, we can translate. Well, now they have the new phone. I speak English, you hear it in whatever language. Marvelous invention. Parents need to read to their children at home, and they need to have their children read to them. Because if we are going to progress as a country, as a people, as a culture, we need to read, write, and understand. And we need to be able to think critically, which is something which we get from reading. We need to put out the many perspectives that we have in this country for other people and ourselves to be able to consume.
Well, thank you so much. And that aspect that you closed on for me is that reading creates connections, and reading builds and improves relationships. The relational aspect of reading. Because if we don't read, our conversations are poorer. Our relationships are poorer. Do you ever see two people in a relationship and they can only resort to physicality? They cannot sit down and have a discussion about what is happening right now in Trump's America, and so on. And it makes us poorer if we do not read. And something I was thinking about as well, it helps us with attention span and focus. Sometimes we wonder why our students do not have any attention span and focus. Is because I believe that they don't read, or they're not being read to. Because as a child, when you are being read to, you have to listen. And so therefore you are paying attention. And so it helps you to develop your attention span and focus as well. So thank you very much. I did enjoy this panel interview, and I hope that our society may become one that appreciates and understands the value that reading holds. So thank you very much and for coming, and continue to promote the love of reading, the joy of reading. When I came to the college first, somewhere in 2010, I want to end on this. I picked up an internal assessment for communication studies, and I used it as a model. It was done by Melissa Bryant, and the topic of it was the joy of reading. And somebody told me that she was such an avid reader, and when I looked at that IA and how it was done so well, the language and everything, I used to use it for the students as a model. Thank you very much. Okay.